Oh my God, Becky, look at her butt.
Hi, and welcome to the Stop Chasing Skinny radio program, where we bring to you different topics about living a fit life, because it's not just about working out and dieting. It's really about all of the other things that are involved in creating a fit life. And there are so many things. And it's kind of hard to kind of piece through some of the things that are just those flashy, shiny things that marketers like to show us and the things that are the real deal. So this is a part of our series. February is National Eating Disorder Awareness Month. Sometimes some people may think that fitness professionals are very familiar with this area. I've been working in the industry for close to a decade now, and I am still learning so much about this. So I have asked experts to come on and share their expertise on all of these different topics. So you already listened to the one last week that was about disordered eating. And then this week I'm so happy that she could make it. Got great recommendations for her to come on. And this is Amy, and she is the director of the only inpatient care center for eating disorders in the state of South Carolina. So welcome, Amy, and could you just do a little more of an introduction of yourself?
Well, thank you, Stephanie, and I'm so glad that you're doing this and that we can get this information out there, because you're really right. A lot of people don't have a thorough understanding about eating disorders and how to recognize them or how to approach people or their families. I am, as you said, the director of the Hearth Center for Eating Disorders in Columbia, and we actually have 4 levels of care. So we do residential, partial, intensive outpatient, and outpatient. And really, prior to the Hearth, eating disorder treatment in South Carolina was pretty scarce. I was asked to come be a part of this team in developing this program, and I lived in Virginia. And when I was first asked, I kind of responded like, oh, that's the eating disorder wasteland in South Carolina. So we are here. We have been open a year and a half. And we are one of the few nonprofits in the country that treat eating disorders. And so we're very invested in what you're doing, education, awareness, prevention, and how we can help people get a better understanding of eating disorders, because they are morphing and changing and becoming more and more prevalent. I've been doing eating disorder work for nearly 20 years, and what started that was my own struggle with anorexia back when I was 18, and I actually had to go to inpatient care myself. And so that started me on the pay it forward. I really want to help others, because it really is a unique disease. And I think that people that have suffered and struggled really have a kind of a different feel than just the average clinician.
Yeah, I just my own background with it. Unless mine hasn't been quite as intense, but yeah, if you haven't been there yourself, it's really hard to help out the clients that you're trying to help, because you're right, it is very different. It's not very clinical. There's so many facets that play into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, unless you can really understand it, it's hard to wrap your brain around the body image distortions, the obsessive piece, and of course some of the cognitive problems that come with it.
Yeah. And, like you said, it is, I haven't done the research to see statistically, but what I have noticed is that social media, that I think plays a role in it. And we'll kind of get into that in a little bit in the show. I want to kind of get your opinion on that. So the first really big question I have for you is, who can be affected by an eating disorder?
Well, I mean, there really is no one that can't be. I think that's more, it used to be back in the day, it was thought of as the rich white girls kind of issue. I am seeing eating disorders in all types of people, populations, socioeconomic statuses, different ethnic backgrounds. So eating disorders are not discriminating in any way, shape, or form. So anybody can be impacted by an eating disorder, and it's so prevalent now that I think everybody asked has known somebody, heard of somebody who has struggled with an eating disorder.
Yeah, and I don't know, a lot of the listeners may not know this, but when I was 26, my best friend from high school actually passed away from complications from an eating disorder. So, and I was there with her during those years of being in high school, and I know like how we were eating and what we were doing and all that crazy stuff. And, I changed paths and she continued down that. And, in the end, 26, that's really, really young. And like you said, too, it doesn't discriminate. So I have also known of men who have had eating disorders and very much in the way that you would, like just the same as women, right?
Men are different, and I think that population is highly underreported. Right now the statistics are showing that 10% of the people that are struggling with an eating disorder are male. Okay. And I do believe that that's underreported because men don't always talk about it like women do. They're not as open, more private, and it may look different. The eating disorder may look different, and so I think that it's just not as recognized in males, but it's growing. And I have consistently, since opening my unit in Columbia a year and a half ago, I always have at least one male on the unit since I've opened. So it is growing, and males are struggling with a lot of the same types of issues, and then they also have some difference with more focus on muscle, weight building, some more of that is present, and then, of course, some steroid abuse. But we also see men that are struggling with more of a avoidant, restrictive food intake. It's a diagnosis called ARFID, avoidant and restrictive, and that's kind of a newer diagnosis. And so we're seeing more men that kind of always struggled with picky eating, being underweight, and then, as they go through puberty and they're trying to develop, their body's not catching up, their brain's not catching up. And so then it kind of engulfs into a full-blown eating disorder.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's so I have never heard of that that specific. I mean, I'm familiar with bulimia and anorexia, which I think a lot of the listeners probably have heard of, and that's what they're familiar with. So let's go a little bit more into the different types of eating disorders, and then some different things we may not know about those.
The eating disorders have gotten so much more complicated. The DSM-4, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is what professionals use to diagnose all kinds of psychiatric illnesses. The DSM-4 basically identified the anorexia, bulimia, and then what is called eating disorder not otherwise specified, where if you kind of had some qualities of one or the other, but you don't quite fit the criteria, you would be put in that EDNOS category. Well, now the DSM-5 is out, and it has expanded, which is, I can appreciate that greatly, because eating disorders, you can't just all fit in one exact box. So we still have the anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa, which I see probably the most consistently. We also have binge eating disorder, which is also on the rise. And when you look at the obesity issues, a lot of that can be connected to binge eating. And so those are all still growing and going. And then we have the other classifications where if people don't quite fit, but we know they're doing something, there's some sort of eating disorder, then we have the ARFID, which is the avoidant restrictive feeding and eating disorder, long title. And then we have the OSFED, OSFED, which is otherwise specified feeding and eating disorder.
So what would that look like?
So OSFED might be someone that struggles maybe with more of an atypical anorexia. For example, like perhaps they're not underweight, but they've lost a large amount of weight in a short period of time. So they may meet some of the criteria, but not all of the criteria. And so they wouldn't be diagnosed with anorexia, but they would be diagnosed with OSFED.
Okay, and then they're probably experiencing, just from my experience, so they're probably experiencing a lot of the challenges that go along with losing such a significant amount of weight. So they've lost muscle, they've lost strength, their mental clarity is probably not so much there. Their hormones might be out of whack, things like that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, absolutely. And, we see this in patients, that have had, gastric bypass surgeries, all kinds of different presentations, struggling with more of the OSFED characteristics. I think, too, some of the older eating disorders still exist, such as pica
Okay.
and rumination. So there's so many different eating disorders that are affecting children, adolescents and adults.
So I'm somewhat familiar with pica, is where you eat things that are not necessarily edible, right?
Right.
Okay, and then
Exactly, like powders,
okay,
soaps.
yeah, I've heard of like rocks and
paper, dirt.
okay, and then what's the other one that you just mentioned?
Rumination disorder, and rumination disorder is a regurgitation disorder. So it's not going to be like bulimia with the self-induced vomiting, but it's more of a where the individual struggles with they regurgitate all their food,
Okay.
not necessarily in an effort to purge the same way. It all comes down to, what is the focus, what is the reason.
Yeah.
And with rumination, the issues, the body image distortions may not be there, the struggles may be different. And so in the rumination, there's very few treatment facilities that will treat it, because it can be very disruptive and distracting, if you have multiple different kinds of eating disorders on your unit.
Okay. And that's so I think the really big thing here too is that I put this whole series together this originally started because I see a lot of behaviors that are straight up what I would call disordered eating. And but it's kind of what the fitness industry and the diet industry has deemed as not just normal, but it's what everybody looks up to and says, oh my gosh, that's amazing. So if you lose 20 pounds in a month, you're incredible. That's a problem, right? So there's these mixed messages.
Well, and I think that when you look at the disordered eating, you're always walking that fine line. And, when I go and speak at schools, maybe they don't acknowledge seeing a lot of anorexia, bulimia, but when I ask how many times do you hear comments at lunch, about don't eat that, eat this, never eat that, you can go in the bathroom and do this, everyone raises their hands.
Yeah.
I mean, it's commonplace. It is what is acceptable in our society. Cut out the carbs, no fats, no sugars. This has all been very normalized, where disordered eating is normalized.
Yeah.
And so that then, is where we walk that fine line all the time of when does it become a diagnosed eating disorder.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, for me personally, I know I was a vegetarian for 10 years, and that was really so that I could just cut out straight up eat food groups. I totally binge ate, but I always just over-exercised. But everybody thought, oh, she's just the fitness girl. I see that a lot too. And then more exercise increased my metabolism, made me hungrier, which kind of fed into that whole binge eating. So I had the binge eating stuff going on, and my metabolism was like crazy, so my body needed it. Do you see that a lot, where it can, like, it's totally a slippery slope and you go from that to full-on eating disorder?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really, when I talk, or when I coach my clients and I talk about training, one of the big things I try to impress upon them is that more is not better. And I was an engineer before I was fitness. So systems, I look at a lot of systems, and I try to put together those, to piece all of that together so that you can see, like, this action is causing this result and making this worse. So it's all this cycle. And I think talking to somebody like you is awesome, to let us know where the cycle is, how to recognize it, to recognize that, the marketing experts are actually feeding us some pretty bad stuff.
Yes.
So we're
and
going to
I'm very invested in that, and in awareness and really helping people understand, the truth about healthy eating and recognizing and understanding eating disorders.
Yeah. Because knowledge is power. And when you understand, like, well, this isn't quite healthy, then you can make the change. So we're going to take just a really quick break, and then we're going to come right back.
One more time.
Stop Chasing Skinny radio program. Tonight we are talking about eating disorders. There's so many things to know about eating disorders. It might be one of those things that, I'm a fitness professional, but I don't know a ton about it. I mean, my best friend passed away when I was 26 from an eating disorder. I still don't know a ton about it. So I wanted to bring Amy on today so that she could help us identify what is normal, what is not normal, which marketing techniques may be even perpetuating this whole entire problem. And it's been very educational so far. So let's go ahead and talk about what some of the potential triggers for an eating disorder are. So in my experience, knowledge is power. And if we can see certain patterns starting and kind of connect the dots to the events, then we're better able to understand what's happening and ask for help sooner rather than later, and to be able to help the ones that we love who maybe cannot help themselves or don't realize that this is a problem.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is, because what leads kind of into that with the triggers, is understanding the why. Why does this person have an eating disorder? How did it develop? What purpose does it serve? Because I think what people need to understand is that the person struggling with an eating disorder, the eating disorder is filling a very valid need. And so the need is important. We have to understand what it fills before we can even begin to think about how to replace it.
Okay.
So the eating disorder, and eating disorders don't just show up. A person doesn't struggle with an eating disorder due to one thing, like, oh, this event happened. She got bullied in school, so therefore she developed an eating disorder. It develops for many different reasons that kind of set the person up. And so when I think about why somebody has an eating disorder, I look at, let's look at the family tree. We start there. Okay, so this person is born, and when we look at their family tree, is there any in their background, way back, we can go back grandparents and great-grandparents, does anybody have a history of depression, anxiety, or addiction? And I don't care how many people you ask. I mean, we all have it back in our trees.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have all of it.
Yeah, everybody's got it.
Yep.
I mean, it's somewhere. We had Aunt Velda, who was bipolar, and then we've got, Aunt Susie, and so we look at that being the predisposition. So this person's born, and they have the predisposition for, say, for example, an anxiety disorder. So then from that, the experiences, and those could be environmental, that can be due to parenting, things that happen at school, that could be trauma, it could be all kinds of different things. You could throw the media in there, all the different things that kind of accumulate as this person is growing and developing is what lends the opportunity for an eating disorder to present itself, because the eating disorder is a way to cope. It's a way to process emotions. It's a way to gain a sense of control. And so they've got these other issues going on, the depression, the anxiety, trauma, all kinds of different things that go along with eating disorders. That all kind of works together. It's like the perfect storm. And so to understand triggers, we have to understand the individual. Because there's lots of things that can trigger an eating disorder. Trauma can trigger an eating disorder. Parents with high expectations that push hard can trigger an eating disorder. Bullying triggers eating disorders. But really there has to be the perfect storm, a combination of things that present itself for that person to, really buy into the eating disorder plan. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense, yeah.
So I kind of think of it like a snowball on the top of a hill. As the snowball rolls down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger. Yep. That's kind of how I think of it. So they're at the top of the hill, they're an itty-bitty snowball, and as they roll down through life, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And that's how I explain it to a lot of parents. A lot of things around the family system, it's not the family's fault. There's no one thing or one person to blame. It's just a combination of different things. And I've had parents that don't have high expectations, but the child does. And, so their anxiety and perfectionism can be one of the triggers that fuels the eating disorder.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, so I guess you just really have to really pay attention to yourself. I know for me, I love to eat tons of food because I had so much anxiety, and it would I would feel full, and then I'd feel calm. And I also once heard, I can't remember where it was, but maybe it was Tony Robbins. Anyway, he was talking about how how our stomach is placed and how our diaphragm is. And he said that sometimes when you overeat, it forces you to take a deep breath. And so we actually feel like a very calming feeling from taking those deep breaths too. Are there things that are associated with that too? I mean, there's some brain chemistry that changes by binge eating. What about some of that stuff?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there's lots of different chemical changes, and the eating disorder, whichever one someone's engaging in, there's responses and there's aspects to it that provide tremendous relief. And the one you named is a good example of that.
Yeah. And then I guess the big thing here that I want the listeners to take away is that it's not just your willpower is broken. I hear that all the time. And then there's extra judgment, right? I suck. My willpower doesn't work. I couldn't stop eating that stuff. There are other things going on. It's not just willpower, right?
Oh, there's definitely other things going on. Okay. I mean, when I look at most people that struggle with eating disorders, and any one of the eating disorders, I'm looking at their ability to recognize and identify what their own emotions are. They may struggle with feelings of anger or guilt or shame, and they're not able to identify it, let alone share it or express it. And the eating disorder becomes a way to deal with that.
Yeah, and sometimes
to deal with that emotion.
And sometimes too, if we're suffering so much emotionally, sometimes we do things to ourselves physically to cause pain, to take the focus off the emotional pain, and because it's easier to deal with the physical pain, right?
Yeah, I mean that can morph into all kinds of different conversations, and I think it's important to note that there's a high, relationship. There's a high correlation between eating disorders and self-injury and suicidality. And so, again, talking about, different ways of dealing with suppressing, numbing the pain, there's a lot of dabbling into other issues as well.
Yeah, and that's, like you said in the very beginning, that's what makes this whole issue so complex.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to take just another quick break, and then we're going to come back, and I want to talk about some of the things that we may not know about eating disorders. So, we've heard a lot of things, we've seen a lot of things, but there are a lot of things that we still don't know. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. We are talking about eating disorders, how to recognize it, what to do, how to seek help. The next thing that I want to talk about, I think that, sometimes people don't realize the negative outcome of having such an eating disorder until they're already in the midst of it. And then they go, oh my gosh, this is, it's not just about being skinny. There are so many other things that go into that. So I want to kind of talk about the damage that's being sustained to our bodies. I don't, however you want to break it up, like if you want to talk about bulimia or anything like that, however you want to do it.
Well, when I look at and when I speak about eating disorders, I of course cover the medical complications. And I think the one very simple takeaway that I always want to make clear is there isn't a system in your body that it doesn't impact. Wow. I mean, everything gets impacted, and so depending on the different eating disorders, different systems are going to be hit and struck. The most common with anorexia is going to be, you've got the osteopenia and osteoporosis because you've got the bone density loss. That's very common, and that usually happens pretty early on with the osteopenia, which is kind of like your warning sign. The electrolyte imbalances is another one that we get very concerned about. because the electrolyte imbalances then lead to the cardiovascular issues, which can be significant with both bulimia and anorexia.
So that means like when I say my best friend passed away from complications, she just her 9-year-old daughter watched her fall over and she was just done. So like we're talking about like not just like, oh, I just passed out, like your heart could stop beating, right? With electrolyte imbalances.
Yeah. Yes, and I think that's probably what people don't understand is that it's very, very difficult to know when somebody's going to have a heart attack or going to fall over. It's not as cut and dry as if you get to this weight, that's going to happen. You really have to do the labs, and you really have to have your physicians involved. And in working on these units, I've had a patient, say, for example, she's 30 years old, she's had her eating disorder for 15 years, she's significantly underweight and has been, and she's absolutely fine. And then I could have a college student who's been bulimic for 3 months come in and her labs are more compromised. There's just no way to know. Every body is different. And so I get more nervous about bulimics oftentimes because the self-induced vomiting causes such chaos in the body when that's happening. And it really causes the impact on the electrolytes and the potassium up and down. So you've got so much going on so quickly. And there's just no way to know, unless you're really monitoring those labs and vitals, exactly how, in crisis one's body can be.
Yeah. Well, and then so back to the bulimia too. It can cause like the erosion of the enamel in the teeth. It could lead to esophageal cancer, right? Because you're constantly putting, and for anybody that knows anything about esophageal cancer, it's really, really, really bad. And then also, so if you're taking laxatives, can it cause the inability to go to the bathroom without the aid of laxatives eventually?
Absolutely. I think that part of the treatment when we have them in treatment is they really have to be on a stool softener and have to have, it's almost like they've got to have, there's a laxative protocol, if you will, to try to get things moving in a more normal way. That's a big challenge that we deal with both anorexia and bulimia because there's so much that's happened in their digestive and their bowels. There's so many issues that you've got to work very hard, and it's a slow and long process to normalize things. And again, it really, the recovery rate is in direct correlation with how long this person has struggled and how quickly intervention happens.
Okay, yeah. So the sooner you can get in, the better. And I see too with I have people who come to me and I break it down into four different kinds, or I guess it's four different kinds of people that come to me. So I have the first person who has never really exercised and they weren't eating well at all, and they see the biggest results because now they've been exercising and now they've probably cleaned up their diet and probably restricted a little bit more than like what they were having. So maybe they were over consuming calories, but they see results really quickly because their metabolisms are intact and their bodies are like, oh, okay, so you give me good food and exercise, I'll give you, I'll release this extra weight that I'm holding on to. I have two more where, somebody has been exercising but not eating well. They'll see some great results because good nutrition is about 80%. Then you have somebody who's been eating well, who's never exercised. They'll see some good results. But then I have this fourth category that comes to me, and they are over dieted. So they've been restricting whether it's macronutrients or calories, and they are over exercised. So they've been training like crazy, and their bodies are just in crisis, and they don't want to lose weight. So one of the things I ask them in the beginning is, what does your past look like? And have you ever suffered from an eating disorder? Because that's going to impact you later on in life, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and what's happening right there with your metabolism?
Well, the metabolism, as you were saying, the body doesn't know whether it's going to starve or eat. And the metabolisms tend to, because we have to use such high amounts of calories to get the weight up when we have patients in here with anorexia. And, sometimes they require, whether it's 3,000 or 4,000 calories, because their metabolism in their body has shut down to the point where it's holding on, and so we have to increase and increase and increase, which is very difficult because they haven't been eating anything and their stomach is shrunk, and so it's a big challenge with the ones that need to restore weight. So we're constantly having to adjust, and we have, registered dietitians on our team, and they have to constantly be looking at the calorie level and increasing and then decreasing and playing the game of trying to help the body get to where it's going to be able to operate normally, which takes a long time before it really regulates itself.
Yeah. And then hormone levels too, right? Hormone levels are probably all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in working with the children and adolescents, because we see children here as young as 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
And, all growth and development and puberty, all of that stuff stops. And that's people think, oh gosh, I won't have to have my period. It's more than just that. It's your brain. It's it's all the different things in your body, all the systems that are trying to develop and grow. All of that gets stunted. And so it takes time to recoup. I mean, typically, when I have a 18-year-old in treatment, and she started her eating disorder when she was 9, when I've got her near restoration and working, I'm dealing with like a 10 or 11-year-old.
That is
so it's
really
difficult.
Interesting. Yeah, you're right. So on the emotional scale, they're like a 10 or 11-year-old.
Right.
And brain
and
function.
developmentally, I mean, they've got, I've had patients that, are in their 20s and they've never had a menstrual cycle.
Wow.
And so, it can be extremely debilitating, and, that's where you get into fertility issues and so on.
Yeah, and I'm learning myself because I just had a hormone panel done for saliva testing recently, and because I really haven't been I haven't had good energy. And it showed that my cortisol is super, super, super low. So I think during all of this, I'm learning more about how hormones work together. I have always known they do work together. I didn't quite understand how. And you're right. People think, oh, I'm just not going to have my period. But that also means that you're going to have problems like staying awake and being happy. And, you're going to kind of live in that depressed state a lot, right?
Right. And it's, in the eating disorder, the mental component is so obsessive and so time-consuming. I mean, the person doesn't have any break from the thoughts and the comparing and the mental aerobics that go on with the eating disorder brain. And that's part of the difficulty in restoration is because you've got to slow down those tapes. You've got to slow down those thoughts. And that's where higher levels of care are often necessary, because you've got to be, in a very regimented treatment program dealing with how to deal with the thoughts that are coming constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would think the deeper into the eating disorder, I mean, those thoughts become super ingrained in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's, actually, I have another question too. So, if somebody is suffering from an eating disorder, can they still be overweight? And why is this? Because I think sometimes we think people who have an eating disorder are just skinny.
Right, and that's something that I really focus on in schools because, everybody, they can be average weight, they can be overweight, they can be underweight, because eating disorders vary. They're morphing, they're changing, as I described earlier. And most bulimics are normal weight. Some are even a little overweight. The only eating disorder that will have somebody be underweight or skinny is going to be anorexia. But then we have atypical anorexia, as I described earlier, where the person may still be overweight, but they lost a large amount. Okay. And so you really can't judge, whether somebody has an eating disorder based upon weight. Yeah. I mean, of course, that's the most obvious sign of anorexia. But that's about it. I mean, the weight is not indicative of what they're struggling with.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people do think you just, if you have an eating disorder, then you are skinny. But I have known, I've known some people who, all across.
And and that's what kids always tell me when I go to schools. They all say, well, when I ask them, tell me what are eating disorders? How do you know?
And welcome back to the Stop Chasing Skinny radio program. I'm learning so much about this. Like you said, it's changed over the years too. And I know when we first talked, we talked on the phone, and you gave me a statistic that really surprised me. And so I wanted to ask if you could share that statistic with the listeners.
Factors when you're looking at, is this disordered eating? Is this an eating disorder? There's just different criteria now, and you have to really break it down.
Yeah, that's a lot. So I want to take a quick break, and then we're going to come right back.
At the edge of the hellfire, it's the
And welcome back to the Stop Chasing Skinny radio program. I'm learning so much about this. Like you said, it's changed over the years too. And I know when we first talked, we talked on the phone, and you gave me a statistic that really surprised me. And so I wanted to ask if you could share that statistic with the listeners.
I think one of the most concerning or alarming statistics that's has come out is that there are more deaths related to eating disorders, whether that's out of a medical complication or suicide, than any other psychiatric illness. And those numbers are climbing. And so when we think about psychiatric deaths, we're always talking about the depression-related suicide.
Right.
Eating disorders is topping that, whether it's the medical complications or the suicide, because patients do commit suicide out of a struggle because they can't recover and the obsessive thoughts are too overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that continues, to grow and develop. Another statistic that's recently come out is that there are more people diagnosed with an eating disorder than breast cancer.
Wow.
So things are growing. We're seeing more and more younger children with eating disorders.
Yeah.
I think they're saying 40% of third graders have been on a diet. So the numbers are just growing alarmingly on children and adolescents, 1 in 4 college women. When we look at South Carolina, we're looking at 4,000 people are suffering right now with an eating disorder.
And that's what's been identified. I mean, I didn't get any help when I was doing my stuff, so I don't count in the statistics. So how many people were like me that were functioning fine and not,
right.
Not being counted?
Right.
Wow.
And I think that there is more awareness now, and that's good, but there definitely needs to be even more awareness. I mean, it just needs to, we need to keep getting out there and talking about it, because it's not going away. I would love for, my hospital to close, because there's no need for it anymore.
Yeah.
But it's just not happening.
Yeah. Well, and something else, so I want to kind of talk a little bit about the social media stuff. And so I have an online fitness business, and my background was in competitive fitness. I don't do that anymore. I think that's its own issue in itself. It taught me a lot of good things. Like, I took a lot of great things out of it. But one thing that I do is I spend a lot of time posting stuff on social media, and I'm always trying to be very conscientious of what I post, because I don't, everybody can be triggered by other stuff, but I try to show a healthy body. I maintain a healthy body fat. I share my weight. I'm 5'9", like 158 pounds, which is, not that 5'9", 115 kind of whatever model thing that you see sometimes. So I try to put that stuff out there. And one of the places that, I was looking on Tumblr one night. I have Tumblr and I hashtag things, right? And so a lot of people started following me, and I was wondering who they were. And so we start clicking on it, and it was so disturbing. I spent about 20 minutes looking into it just to see. I was so surprised this was happening. But it was a lot of these young girls who were they had eating disorders, and they were cutting themselves as well. And they had their own like online communities that they had their profiles. They were sharing like all their quote unquote tips and tricks. It showed pictures of them with their family, and it would say something like, "Yeah, they think that I'm so normal, but this is the life I really live." It was so disturbing to me. But and then I thought, wow, if I were a parent of a 13-year-old, like I would want to know that there are things like this out there. Have you heard of that stuff? Like what is your take on the social media and all that?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more on how disturbing it is, and I see it constantly. The pro-Anna, websites, blogs, groups. There's it's all out there, very dark. There's groups out there that want to support each other, help each other restrict. Let's be accountable. All of that, and there's other issues that come with eating disorders, and so sometimes these individuals are also just lonely.
Yeah.
They're wanting to find connection, and they're finding that through their eating disorder and through social media. That is a huge proponent, and again, it's not the cause. I mean, I'm not going to say that social media causes eating disorders, but it certainly is a contributing factor. And it certainly gives the eating disorder a voice and a place to resonate. And so I think that it doesn't, and I don't see how it's going to be rectified. I mean, every time I try to jump in on all these sites and get them shut down and move here and do that, and I would be driving myself nuts if that's all I did, because it's so there's no end to the possibilities.
Yeah.
And that's utterly frightening. And I hear it, with all of our patients. They all have been there, seen it, been a part of it. With the pictures and the blogs and the all the feedback and accountability for we can help with your weight issue.
Wow.
So lots of identification. There's a lot of that out there with the social media.
Yeah, it was so shocking to me. And like I said, I mean, if I were a parent of a, I don't know, a boy or a girl, that's just, I would just want to know that at least that stuff is out there. And, parents listening, check these things, because, I mean, it was so disturbing to see these girls posting these beautiful pictures of them with their beautiful families and, doing fun things. And then they were like, this is what they think I'm doing. This is, so, yeah, just, I guess, just have more awareness and where people can find more information for you guys.
Education on that.
Oh, good.
The YouTube videos and all the different things that are everywhere. We do a lot of education with families.
Yeah. Gosh, because that's kind of all you can do, right? Is to help to educate. And then I think something too I think people, I think we miss it. Especially as mothers, and again, I mean, I have a yellow lab, and poor guy, he has a binge eating disorder. He would just eat it all, but no. If parents, how, especially mothers, I was listening to something, and they were saying, like, I hear kids say they mimic what their mothers say. So if mothers really obsess over the scale, over the food, the good food, the bad food, the calories, kids have no choice but to pick that up. And it doesn't matter how much the parent tells the child how beautiful they are, how wonderful they are. They subliminally, they take in how the mother is feeling about her body. Is that, do you see that?
Oh, I see that consistently. I mean, I think that, and dads too. I mean, we, parents and how we parent, like I said, I'm not going to say it's the parent's fault. It's not mom's fault she developed it, but that is a key part, and that has to be addressed in treatment. Yeah. We address that in treatment. What are the things that have led to your eating disorder? Because if we all understand that it's like that little snowball with all these different contributing factors, mom's going to be in there too.
Yeah.
And mom, hating on her body all the time, and maybe she doesn't think that's impacting daughter, but daughter hears that, and daughter, mom thinks that daughter's not really listening, and what daughter is saying to herself is, well, she hates her body so much, what does she think of mine? Yeah. I'm worse. I need to hate myself. we see a lot of the nutrition myths and, the takes from families: only eat this, that's a bad food, we don't have any junk food in our house at all. All of those different things are things that we have to take apart in treatment and deal with. The family component is significant.
Yeah.
And moms as parents, we do need to watch what we say. Yeah. We need to understand that, they're listening when we don't realize they are.
Yeah.
And so, we've got to be role models for, positive body acceptance. Stop the fat talk. We don't do fat talk.
Yeah. Oh, that's
that's a significant. That would help a tremendous amount if parents, had to go through a whole parenting thing, when they're having a kid, to be able to talk about that. And and I'm a parent, and I have a daughter, and I've tried to be very cognizant of my messages to her, and how I want her to view herself and deal with her emotions and what she experiences and hears and sees.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. Oh man, if you guys come up with that class, let me know so we can spread that. Because I'd like to take it because I see a lot of other fitness professionals who, it's a challenge for us because we have people who are coming to us to get healthier, but they come to us in a bunch of different ways. And so I think for us to be best educated is great. Like, I personally, my philosophy is to stay away from the scale. I know how much I weigh because when people ask me to, I want to show them that I'm not skinny. Like, I weigh a healthy weight. And 3, when I travel, I have to get on the scale to make sure my bag isn't more than 50 pounds. But, but it's, and I've shared a couple pictures where I've gained about, 23 pounds over the past 4 or 5 years, but I look the same. And I pretty much wear the same clothes. So that shows that, muscle just takes up less space and just kind of get off the scale. But, as a fitness professional and trying to motivate my clients, that motivation is a fine line. It's kind of fuzzy, and it kind of depends on what your idea of motivation, what motivates you. Do you work with fitness professionals? Do you guys have? Yeah, if you had a course like that, that'd be awesome. Do you have that?
Well, we don't have a course like that. Our registered dietitians that we have here are also in the fitness world, so we have excellent staff. And I think that there are a lot of dietitians that definitely come from a sports and fitness background. Mm-hmm. And that could be a good thing, like you've talked about, or it could be a, kind of a not so good thing, as with anything. And I think that, really, really working on the truths and not the myths, and healthy nutrition and all foods fit, and exercise, balance, and moderation with everything. I think that we see a lot of athletes. Athletes, there's a great number of athletes that struggle with disordered eating, bordering on, and sometimes diagnosed with an eating disorder. Mm-hmm. But it can happen with any population. Yeah. I think that what's really important is you were talking about, the moms and families and what to say. I think it's really important to understand that we have to validate what that person's going through. We so often focus on, when our child comes home and says, "Oh, I feel fat, I'm ugly," really just what happened today. Stay away from you're not, you're perfect. Don't say that. Really validate what they're going through and find out what happened, or what are their thoughts, what are their feelings, because it really is underneath. The food is just the tool, Yeah. And you've got to understand what happened, what is the process. And that's what I try to encourage people to do, is to peel away the layers.
Do you have
layers?
Do you have books that you recommend people read? Like, I read Women, Food, and God, and I recommend that to a lot of people. The other book is Daring Greatly, because so much of this comes from not feeling like you're good enough. Yeah,
there's Life Without Ed is a really good and popular book. Okay. There's so many. There's a catalog that you can go online called GURZE, G-U-R-Z-E.
Okay.
And they have tremendous resources that I encourage people. You can order just about any kind of eating disorder book there, and it has the top picks, and it also breaks it down if you're looking for something more from a spiritual, perspective or a clinical perspective. I mean, it's the go-to place. So that would be GURZE, GURZE, and also bulimia.com has some great resources.
Okay, great. I'll put all that in the show notes too for listeners that are trying to drive or walk their dog or something.
There's so many out there that you have to know the individual, because some books could be more triggering. It really depends on the person and where they're at.
Yeah, I could see that. For me, like I said, I did not seek professional treatment. I have read a bazillion books, and trying to figure out what I've been doing in my life. So those are just some that helped me. And so then, let's take one more quick break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about the treatment options and then where people can find more information for you guys.
I'm just trying to be more than they said I would. Always felt I could, but never took the initiative to make it live. Working these dead-end jobs, week to week, till I'm weak and they don't need me to be. First hand, I done seen niggas work forever and still don't end up with enough for their family to live better. It's sad, but that's America, land of the free and home of the brave. But what I see.
Stop Chasing Skinny radio program, where tonight we are talking about eating disorders. This has been a very interesting conversation, very important. There are so many things that I think we do that's not only acceptable in our normal society, it's almost expected. So, just kind of understanding when certain things are not necessarily healthy. They may be normal, but they're not healthy. And recognizing those things and removing some of those things from our lives, I think, is really important. So let's talk a little bit about what the treatment options are. You mentioned it in the beginning of the show, just a little more and what would somebody do if they're listening to this and they're like, okay, well, I've tried a lot of stuff and I can't do it. What would they do?
I think that when you look at treatment, the first step is if you know someone who's struggling and you're concerned, I think the first step is a medical physician, okay? Because we want to know what's going on inside the body, okay? We have ideas about what's happening on the outside, but do we know what's going on the inside? So the first step is usually seeing a medical professional, and then from there you go directly into counseling.
Okay.
And I always recommend finding somebody that specializes and treats eating disorders. A lot of clinicians don't want to touch it. Eating disorders are scary. They're complex. Yep. And so you really have to look to find somebody that actually treats eating disorders. And then they're going to help recommend whether you need a dietitian. They'll assess as to whether you need a higher level of care. Mm-hmm. If you get the eating disorder or disordered eating, preferably early, then outpatient therapy and that could work. Yeah. But usually, when the eating disorder has really taken root and they're really beyond that point, then higher levels of care are necessary, like residential, partial hospitalization, or intensive outpatient, and then sometimes acute. Acute is where they're not medically stable, and that's also considered inpatient. So again, and there's a site called edreferral.com that has all treatment across the whole country. Okay. So you put in your state, and it will pull up all the eating disorder professionals. Okay. In your county, in your city, and that's a great resource to have. But you really have to understand that early intervention is key. So if you know someone, and again, how many people, participate in disordered eating, the number is huge. Yeah. So if you see signs of disordered eating along with increased isolation, increased depression, then you want to look at intervention even at that point, because that could prevent the disordered eating from then, falling off that line right into the eating disorders, which that's the best prognosis. Yeah. Otherwise, you're looking at the higher levels of care.
Yeah. Well, at least there are some options. I can't. Whenever you said you guys have only been open for a year and a half, that kind of shocked me. I didn't realize that it was really that recent. And something else too, now if you're a fitness professional and you're listening to this, obviously you care enough. If you're a fitness professional and you are listening to this and you know of other fitness professionals, I highly recommend sharing this with them, because we are kind of the first line of defense sometimes, because people come to us and they want exercise programs, they want diet programs, and you can pretty quickly see if there are some things going on. And so instead of just being like, oh my gosh, this client's driving me nuts, she texts me all the time about how much she hates her body, well, take the time to let her know that this isn't normal and that she should get help. So I see that a lot too, where, some trainers will just chit chat and be like, this client annoys me. Well, no, this client needs your help.
And one more thing, when you're in working with fitness professionals, excessive exercise is a form of purging. It is a purging behavior.
Totally did it.
And it is so consistent with anorexia and bulimia. And so that's one of the signs that we look for, is the excessive exercise. And then also that obsessive. When you talk about annoying clients, I think about someone who's obsessing.
Yeah, and that's what it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because you're absolutely right. If somebody, and you think about it too, if somebody is telling you something, whether it's in person, in text, or whatever, that external them telling you is probably just a tiny tip of the iceberg of the record that's playing in their head.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah. And some people really don't know. Like for me, when I was going through all my stuff, I was running way, way, way too much. And then I ended up having musculoskeletal issues and things like that. But instead of getting the help that I needed, I hired a fitness coach so I could compete. So, it took me all the way to my knees because I had adrenal failure. It was not good, but I built myself back up from there. And so had I was trying to fix myself. I think if I would have found somebody who understood what I was going through, and called me out on it too, because I was perfectly happy with just pretending like everything was okay. It would have caused a lot, or it would have saved a lot of pain and suffering. And who knows? I mean, you never know if you go into something like that, if you're actually going to come out on the other side stronger from it, or if it's going to really just be the end of you.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Amy. This is something, like I said, is very important to me. I see it a lot. And there's no judgment. Like I just, I did have to tell a client, hey, you're sending me a lot of texts about, you're up and down, and you're sending me a lot of texts that are not, they're not it's not good. And so I think maybe you should see someone. And it took her a couple of days to get back to me. And she was like, thank you so much. I needed somebody to tell me that. So, you never know who just needs to hear it. And there's nothing wrong with getting help. I mean, that's how you get, you hired a fitness coach. So why wouldn't you hire a therapist to help you get past that?
Exactly.
So, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We're going to put all of the information that you shared, we're going to put all of that in the show notes so the listeners can access that. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
No, I appreciate the opportunity, and because, as I said, we are very invested in prevention and awareness and education. So we're always happy to talk to schools, talk to churches, talk to groups. We're that's what we're all about. We're a nonprofit, so.
That's great. And you're right in our backyard, so.
Yep.
Well, thank you, and I will talk to you all listeners next week. You've heard me talk a lot about learning how to reach your fitness goals, and more frequently, how to look as fit as you feel, while learning to stop chasing skinny. And you've also thought to yourselves, yeah, I do want to reach my fitness goals in a shorter, more concise way, to stop wasting my time bouncing back and forth from fitness tip to fitness tip in magazines, wasting hours researching the latest and greatest diet, only to end up looking and feeling the same way you've been looking and feeling for years. And my guess is that you've been thinking about this for a long time. Am I right? I know the feeling because I played these games too, for a very long time, in fact. I'm here to tell you this. Stop thinking and sign up for the SK Fit Life Challenge, an online training, nutrition, and coaching program that will lead you through 12 weeks of step-by-step guidance to help you finally reach your goals of looking fabulous and feeling fabulous. You're going to get to free up all the headspace you've been wasting picking through random diet information being fed to you through the media and simplifying the seemingly complicated world of health. Your chances now. Do you really need more time, more information, more plans for the future? Or do you want to become that fit person today? Because the truth is this. You can be that fit person, or you can be the person that sits around thinking about becoming fitter. It's your choice. Read more magazines, blog posts, and bits and pieces on social media, or take action. Because let's face it, if you're not where you want to be, your current program is not working out for you. I want you to be successful. And why is this? Because you've already got what it takes. You've been doing the work all along. It's just been the wrong work. You have the desire, the discipline, and the potential. Now let's get you on the right track so those efforts you are already putting in can take you in the best direction possible. Join me and the hundreds of other SK Fit Life clients for the 12-week online fitness challenge at skfitlife.com. All right, now let's get back